Okay, so last week we spoke about eating the big matzah controversy in Morocco and the other Sephardic countries about a new machine that came out, and people were concerned that there's potential problems of hametz. There was others who said that there really wasn't, and these are ongoing issues about new situations and how we deal with them in the kashrut world. There was in the 1700s a famous takana in Sefer Mishpat Uzdaka Yaakov, written by many Moroccan hachamim, among them Rabbi Yaakov ben Sur. Beforehand, there was Rabbi Avram ben Musa. Rabbi Avram ben Musa was one of the great Rabbanim in Morocco. I just spoke about him recently as we published one of his works. And they wrote about having rice in Morocco and why in that time there was bags of rice that were next to other bags, and there could have been potential issues that were raised. I'm not going to discuss rice today, it's a whole different topic. And they made a gzira, and they made sure that, since there are chances that you might have chametz, we have to keep away from it. Nowadays, the food industry has evolved, and we have different challenges. Nowadays, the food industry has become so complicated that if it's processed food, we all know the health dangers to processed food, but there's a lot of different ingredients that go into processed foods. So people could innocently look at the ingredients. They say, well, the FDA requires that you have to have all the ingredients listed. So I see all the ingredients, and it doesn't look to be like anything bad. I don't see any pork in there, so it must be okay. So the truth is, speaking like that is like me speaking about stocks. I have no idea what I'm talking about. If I speak about stocks, if you would consult with me about stocks, that would be a very bad business decision. The same thing when we speak about kashrut and we are not on the field, which means we are not the professionals that are at the factories that know biochemistry, that we understand what these products contain. We are basically playing Russian roulette. The game of Russian roulette means is that you take a gun and you have 8 places for a bullet. You put one bullet inside and you swing the bullet. You say, maybe it'll be okay, maybe it won't be okay. It's very possible that a lot of times there won't be any tarif. But eventually, if a person keeps on doing that, he will hit into a problem of having tarfut. And that's the big problem. And let me just give a few examples where this comes into play. Number one, let's discuss different things that could be found in food and potential issues. One of the ingredients that you'll find very often in a package that has the different ingredients listed inside is natural flavors. You see natural flavors. What could be wrong with natural flavors? There's something very wrong, because when it's written natural flavors, they don't have to disclose what those natural flavors are. And one of the possibilities that it could be natural flavors is nevelot v'trefot, which is totally non-kosher animals. They could be using cats as extracts of cats in natural flavors. That's also natural. They could be using something that's very popular, although it's not as common nowadays, which is castoreum oil, which is oil from beavers, and which is also tarif, obviously. And these things are natural, and they're not necessarily pagum, which means they're not necessarily made into non-tastable items, which would be permitted under certain circumstances, but these are tasty, and these natural flavors are added into the food. So you're going to tell me, well, even if it's natural flavors that's added into the food, what's the big deal? It's batel, it's nullified. Here we enter a discussion that the poskim, the isur veheter klal kafeh, and the Taz discusses this at length about milta de avida le ta'ama, something that is made for taste, lo batel, is not batel. That means we know that 1 out of 60 is batel, and a lot of times these natural flavors will be nullified. They are not the majority, and even if and even if the natural flavors I'm not the majority, I'm sorry, are not, they have to be 1/60th, which is around 2% roughly. So it depends on different equations. But even if you want to say that out of those natural flavors, you only have a little bit that's not kosher, but and therefore it should be batel. But the halacha tells us that milta de'avida b'ta'ama, something that is made for taste, is not batel. And this is brought down in the poskim, and there's no argument about milta de'avida b'ta'ama. That's something that is made specifically for taste. And especially if you put something like natural flavors, that its whole purpose is to give flavor. That's what the name is written. It's in order to give flavor. So even if it's less than 1/60th, but it's still not batel. Another similar concept is the Rashba in Teshuvot. The Rashba writes in Chelek Gimel Siman Resh Yud Dalid that if something is an integral part of the ingredient list, and it's not it didn't haphazardly fall in there, but it's something that was put in there b'kavana. It was something that was put there intentionally as part of the ingredients. Then it's not subject to the halachot of bitul. If something that was put there b'kavana is not subject to the laws of bitul. Interestingly, you would say, okay, this Rashba who says it's lehalacha lemaaseh, the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredea Siman Kuf Lamedalet Siman Seif Yud Gimel brings this Rashba down lehalacha. Gets a little bit complicated because there's a Nodab Yehuda in Siman Nun Vav that discusses a certain type of drink that had a little bit of nivelot v'trefot in it, and it was batel, and he brings the Rashba down. He says it wasn't there for flavor, and it seems to be it was batel, so he didn't concern himself with the Rashba. But the Tur Shulchan Aruch do concern this. Shulchan Aruch does concern himself with the Rashba. There is what to discuss on this, and I'm not going to get into this on this forum, but there is what to discuss on the Rashba. But even if somebody doesn't want to be choshesh for this Rashba, which is a very strong opinion, nevertheless, as we mentioned, it's a milta de'avida b'ta'ama. It's natural flavors, and natural flavors are not batel. So when you see natural flavors, you have a risk of it being from non-kosher sources, and that is not batel. So that's one serious issue that people tend to overlook. A second serious issue is when you see in the ingredients it's written glycerin. Glycerin is a product that could be made from vegetable glycerin, or it could be made from animal glycerin. And it's usually, the way Rabbi Belsky, Zichrono Livracha, writes in Sefer Shulchan HaLevi, writes that glycerin is tasty and it is not pagum. It is not something that's foul tasting. It's able to be tasted. He said certain people, janitors or whatever, in his non-Jewish janitors, to taste the gelatin to be able to tell him if it's tasty or not. He said he didn't. There's no question about it. He wrote that it is tasty. So if that's the case, or it's not called foul tasting, al kol panim. So if that's the case, if it's from animal fats, it's for sure a problem. Now a lot of people say, well, they looked into it and they say that it's vegan and it's natural and it's vegetable flavors. This has a serious issue because most plants that produce vegetable glycerin also produce glycerin from bovine, which is from non-kosher animals. And if it's in the same plant, they use the same steam in order to cook this glycerin, in order to process this glycerin. And this steam that's being used for animal fat is also going through and being used for glycerin, for vegetable glycerin. It renders the whole vegetable glycerin tarif. So even if you say, well, no, I have vegetable glycerin, a lot of times it's in the same plant, and it is also a problem of animal bliot, of animal absorptions in it. That's another Russian roulette case. Another problem, which is very similar, is magnesium stearate, which is also many times made from vegetables, but it could also be made from animal fat. And in the same plant, as we mentioned, that by glycerin, that they could make vegetable magnesium stearate, they could also be making animal magnesium stearate. And in the same plant, they're going to have biliot, they're going to have absorptions that could render this ingredient of magnesium stearate nevelot v'trefot. And people are not aware of it. They see the word magnesium stearate. Oh, it's probably from vegetables because it's written it's from vegetarian and it's fine. But sometimes they have bidiot. They have absorptions. Another issue, which is a famous issue that was discussed by the poskim at length, which is gelatin. Now we know that there's a big machloket by gelatin, which is once again gelatin is a product that is extracted from the bones of animals in order to take a certain product from the animals that is used as gel and jelly and put into jello and other products, and it's very helpful. And gelatin, which comes from bones of nivelot v'trufot, should be tarif. Nevertheless, many poskim say that since it went through a process of nullification, it's similar to other products that we find in halacha, that it nullifies it, and therefore when you restore it, it's already not considered a status of terifot and of food. It's a very big machloket beyond once again the scope of this shiur. Rav Ovadia Yosef in Yabia Omer, I believe it's in Chelek Zayin of Yabia Omer, discusses this at length, and he comes out leheter, and one of his main principle, I would say, one of the foundations of the teshuvah, is that bones are not considered to be considered tarif in an animal. In other words, if somebody would eat a bone, it's not called food. So therefore, if you extract the gelatin from it, so it's not considered that you extract the tarif. That's one of his strong bases to be matir, as well as the other poskim as well. They use this as a strong basis. Nowadays, though, the production of gelatin has changed. Nowadays, they produce gelatin from pig skins. Because the fact that pig skins are very soft, that's where they extract the gelatin from. Now, by pig skins, it's written in the Gemara in Mishnah in Masechet Chulin Daf Kuf Chav Bet Amud Aleph, Orotehen kebesaran. Their skins are like their flesh, which means that although you're allowed to eat skins from other animals, technically, we're not going to get into the halacha lema'aseh if that's something that you should do, but technically it's not considered tarif. Nevertheless, by pigs, by chazirim, there's a special halacha of orotem kebesaram, which means that nowadays, close to 90% of the production of gelatin is made by from pigs. Practically speaking, much softer and easier to do. They still use bones to make gelatin, but they use that for the photography industry, because in order to publish, I think people still don't use digital, and they print photography. They use gelatin. That's where they use the bones for. It has a better consistency. But gelatin that's found in processed foods nowadays is mostly coming from pig skins, which doesn't have the same leniencies. Could be that some will argue it's still applicable to heter, that it totally was nullified and therefore you're restoring it. And it could be that that's a legitimate argument, and that would have to be examined by the poskim who permitted gelatin. Would they still permit it in such circumstances? Not to mention that even the Rav Ovadia Yosef who permitted gelatin, I think somebody recently made me aware that the Sefer Yelkut Yosef writes that nevertheless, for sure, lechatchila, one shouldn't use it, and that's talking about the gelatin made out of bones. And the kashrut agencies in America and Canada do not allow gelatin, and as far as I know, the agencies in Eretz Yisrael as well don't. In the Rabbanut HaRashit, there's a policy that goes back and forth about gelatin, but Ikar Halacha definitely has been accepted nowadays to stay away from gelatin. So if a person says, well, I want to be lenient, nevertheless I want to be lenient, he's just entering a huge machloket, and really we wouldn't know what those poskim who were matir gelatin, whether they would have revised their psak nowadays. So that's another very interesting thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is different things that could be found in products of that don't have a hechsher. Like sometimes there's types of alcohols that could be extracted from wine that's not kosher. There's a cochineal extract that comes from little bugs, that beetles, that is made for red dye, and sometimes it's batel, sometimes it's not. There is a sugya that's called na'asila chazuta. If something's made for look, is that also batel or not? So sometimes it could be batel, sometimes it's not. There's a type of honey, when you go see honey, that's not made from bees. It's made from aphids, which are certain types of insects, which is forbidden according to halacha. It's not kosher, and they could put that honey inside. And it could be that these things are not always batel. Tea sometimes has a spray on it that is sprayed on a non-kosher substance, and sometimes even tea could have an issue. Not always. Most of the time it's okay, but that's why the kashrut agencies are here. There are minerals like calcium carbonate that's written natural, but sometimes it comes from natural oyster shells that have trefot. And as I mentioned, in some of these cases they will be batil, but in some cases they're not. In a lot of cases, as we mentioned, by glycerin it's not batil, gelatin it's not batil, natural flavors it's not asilitam. So a person really has to know what he's doing. Just to realize the OU, as one of the largest, probably the largest kashrut in the world, but one of the definitely the largest in North America, certifies over 1 million products. 1 million products. That means we don't have a lack of kosher food and a lack of kosher supervision. And since we don't have a lack of kosher food and kosher supervision, and we have issues that could be in the multitudes. And after speaking to many people that actually go to these plants, they tell me what the potential issues could be. I'll tell you a story that happened to me one time on Pesach. A story that that happened to me personally. We bought certain spray oil. In other words, vegetable oil that you spray, and that brand is usually kosher lePesach. It's usually OU kosher lePesach. It was Glicks actually, but unfortunately there was some of those that were in the Pesach section and they weren't kosher certified. So we bought it. We didn't notice that it didn't say kosher lePesach, and we used it for a lot of the Pesach cooking. When we realized what happened, so we were alarmed. We said, "What do you mean? There's not really kosher lePesach." So I geared up my rabbinic tricks, and I said, "Well, what's the big deal? It's probably okay. It's just oil. They just needed the extra certification just to make sure, but you don't really need that certification." So I texted somebody very high up in the industry, and he told me, "Yeah, it's okay." Then a half hour later, he gets back to me. He says, "Actually, now he remembers. Sometimes he remembers in that plant, what they would do is that they would cake the vat of oil with flour beforehand." And I said, "Is that so?" So he says, "Yeah, they would cake it with flour beforehand. So you have to ask the person who produced it." So I got to the head, which was Rabbi Glick, and I spoke to him Erev Pesach. I said, "Listen, I used all my food. I used flour. So I use this oil. Is it okay?" So he says there's a strong possibility that it was there's flour in there. So I did not discard the food because it's still batel, and according to the strict halacha, I would have been able to use it because you don't say choser v'neor. But I'm not going to serve, something. I spend so much money, and I'm going to have, according to some poskim that say that there is choser v'neor and rely on things. So I took all the food and we stored it, we sold it, and we used it for the rest of the year. But we didn't use it for Pesach. So we had some Pesach food during the year. But who would have thought? I mean, this is not an extreme case where it was mamash taref, but who would have thought that we work so hard on something and it's just oil? What could be in oil? You can never know. And therefore, especially if we take a look at how our forefathers approached Pesach with such stringency, with such carefulness, with such yirat shamayim, that they would never just pick up a product and say, "Well, it's probably okay," or "Yeah, our chances are is that it's probably batel and it's probably this." You have to be. It's just like me speaking about stocks. You have to be a real expert to know what is okay, what is not okay. If you look at the teshuvot, how they spoke about it with such yirat shamayim, about even rice, they said, rice, even though it's allowed, but it could be mixed in. We don't want to touch it, and people have so many chumrot in their house because of that. That is safeguardings because of because of so many potential mishaps that can have. So the rule of thumb is that Baruch Hashem, we're living in a society where we have abundance. If you're living on an island and you're stuck, you got to do your research, and then you got to ask your Rav what you can have, what you don't, what you can't have. But Baruch Hashem, you're living in a place of abundance. There's no necessity to play Russian roulette and chas v'shalom get into situations that you compromised your hechsher just because you wanted an extra gummy bear or whatever else. So that is the that is the rule of thumb. And for Pesach as well, our tradition, our misurah, was never to eat things without knowing where it came from. If it's natural, nuts, eggs, that we could see what's written. But once you get into the processed foods, it gets so complicated that unless you're an expert and you know where it comes from, once that you're playing and you're playing dangerous turfs. Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and